with both Western teams being knocked out of the quarterfinals of Worlds, the question of where the gap is and what is the gap exactly is a conversation that has popped up every single year whenever this happens. Now, the previous 2 years, we did see some Western teams make deeper runs, but this seems to be a return to, I wouldn't say a norm, but a status where the Eastern teams tend to dominate with four Asian teams, one team from the LPL and three teams from the LCK filling up the four semi-final slots at the 2021 Worlds. So what exactly is the gap or what is causing it? Now, every year is the same conversations that come up, the quality of solo queue, availability of talent base within the various regions, cultural differences, as well as the two-week spec cycle, and how that affects the training patterns of every team. And of course, towards the start of the season, the coach for G2, formerly from LNG, Nelson, he could be quoted saying that it's simple math. The Western teams play 5 games a day and the Eastern teams play six or more, quoting the practice schedules. And this continued to be a conversation trend as the LPL English content release various pieces interviewing the LPL players, showing their work schedules and people talking about how WB was practicing 20 hours a day. More recently as well, with C9's elimination, their coach Mitty could be quoted saying that the Korean teams get to scrim against the LPL, the LGL, everyone basically. Whereas we are, referring to C9, are hard stuck in EU or NA. For a Western team to do well, we'd have to put camp in Korea for a while and then do a tournament then. So the quality of practice and access to practice partners is also a concern. Now, how does all of these translate onto the Rift? There was one team that had a very deliberate and different approach that qualified for Worlds and made it all the way to the quarterfinals. Now, contrasting to this idea that practice has to be more, practice has to be better, that's very often espoused by Eastern coaches. The head coach for Mad Lions, Mac, was quoted in one of the post-game lobby interviews saying that I think that there was a lot of rhetoric, narrative, discrediting us for being openly willing to talk about the fact that we were stressed and tired, and I think that that is really irresponsible. Now, having a balanced practice schedule, and in fact, all the way back in the previous year as well, when the Mad Lions qualified for Worlds with the all-rookie roster, this was a team that had a much more radical approach towards practice, even having a single day of solo queue for the players to have less scrims and have more time to themselves to focus on their own development. So when Mad Lions faced off against Dalman Kia, this seemed to be a testament of sorts of clashing philosophies and how these things would pan out in the teaser we got during the midway mark of the season in after spring at MSI, Damwon Kia emerged the victors in 3-2 after coming back 2-1 from behind. And when both teams clashed again in the quarterfinals of the 2021 World Championship, a lot of people were wondering if the Mad Lions could reverse their fortunes and be able to come out ahead this time around. However, it seemed like the LZK Giants seemed to have pulled ahead and had a very resounding, convincing 3-0 victory over the Mad Lions. Was this because of the practice? Was this because of the amount that they played? Were the Mad Lions tilted? Were they burnt out? Now, this is a question that I can't necessarily answer without having an insider be on site. But with the content on this channel, we are going to take a look at the tactics and how this kind of played out on the Rift itself. So if we were to take a look at the three broad pictures of how these teams played the games during the MSI run, the Damonkia, they started off playing a scaling team by composition, whereas Mad Lions opted for a Drake stacking, traditionally one of their weaker areas, and Damonkia took the first game in the series before Mad Lions took a 2-1 lead, playing a scaling team by style and two-lane pick style. Which Damonkia opted for Drake stacking against the scaling team fighting and scaling team fighting against the two-lane pick. Now, I wouldn't say that it's a clear rock, paper, scissors, but you can say that in particular matters, you could argue for a typing advantage in some of these scenarios. But it's clear that when Mad Lions is able to get these particular stylistic matchups, the tactics that are available to them tend to shine best. And the there was a great adaptation from the side of Damwon Kia, as once again going back to the interviews during the MSI itself, saying that Damwon Kia adapted really well to what was happening, and they then struck back to win the last two games, going for Drake stacking against the two-lane pick style of Mad Lions, which is effectively a one-lane style, right? And if you went back to my coverage of the previous walls, I talked a little bit about how these compositions interacted with one another, and then beating Mad Lions when they opted into the comfort of mages to the mid lane, going for the scaling style by crushing them with a two-lane pick composition, which was something new and could have been something that Mad Lions picked up on a little bit sooner. Because when we start to look at what happened at Worlds itself, or before we even look at Worlds itself, this is how the rest of the table feels. So it's very rare that you have teams both opt into playing Drake stacking at the same time, and it's very rare that you have teams both opt for scaling team fight, as there usually will be one team who has a significant scaling advantage, which forces the other team into one of the other archetypes instead. Now, if we were to extrapolate a little bit based on the tactics that I've covered in this channel, I do believe that if both teams would have gone for a bruiser heavy to lane pick style, I do think the Mad Lions would have the advantage, and the Mad Lions went for Drake stacking style. It wouldn't have been that effective against Damwon Kia if Damwon Kia went for a bruiserish kind of two-lane pick style. Now, this is just in general, given how Mad Lions tends to play with these compositions, that allows me to come to these conclusions. So, what happened at Worlds itself, right? At Worlds, Damwon Kia took three games. One game playing scaling team fighting against Mad Lions playing Drake stacking, and the Mad Lions opted into playing scaling team fighting in two of the other games, with Damwon Kia playing a two-lane pick style against them. So after all the games, Yamuna was quoted saying that Damakia simply played better than us in the mid game. Was this necessarily true, or did Mad Lions just choose the wrong stylistic matchups in draft? If we were to examine the draws a little bit more, this is the draw from Game 3, where the first half of the draw leaves the Monkey open to two possible options. They could end up playing for Drake stacking, or they could end up playing for two-lane pick composition. After the second round of bans comes in, they do pick a Ziggs in the AD carry position, which would suggest that they are heavily leaning towards playing towards a two-lane towards playing a two-lane pick composition, as Ziggs is not the best champion at getting lane priority in the early stages of the game to enable Drake stacking composition that Daewon Kia had so much success with in 2020. Now, this is where Matt Lyons has the opportunity to really answer this after seeing what's effectively an opponent's composition being drafted face up into them, and they opted into a scaling team fighting composition here, picking the Victor as a response to the Ziggs and then sending it to the mid lane to face off against the Syndra, and Damakia rounds out their composition with a very strong CC or pick support in the form of the Pike. Now, Damakia wins this game, obviously, and if we take a look at one of the other games as well, there seems to be a certain pattern here with the way Mad Lions are drafting. With them in the first game of the series, opting very hard into a strong scaling setup as compared to what Damwon Kia was opting for, going for the likes of Graves and Nephilos on the R1, R2, and then Orion on the R3 as a response to the Syndrome. Now, this could be based on their read of Damakia for 2020. If you look at Damakia, this team seemed to be a little bit of a one-trick pony where they played one style very effectively, which is the Drake stacking style, and this is how they won the 2020 World Championship. They found the right metagame for that, and they were able to run away with the competition. And their B plan of sorts would be to play the scaling team fight. And in this case, if you were from approaching the draft from Medline's standpoint, you would then end up putting yourself in the right typing, right? As if you were to counterpick the mid-lane matchups accordingly, you would then guarantee yourself the ability to outscale, and you would then be able to create this Drake stacking versus scaling team fighting scenario, which Mad Lions had success in beating them on in the past. However, what's different in 2021 is that Damwon Kia has picked up a third style of play. So Damwon Kia has been able to round off the game, and they're able to pick up a two-lane style of play, which has been more often than not their plan B of operating rather than going for the Drake stacking, which is something that they've played a fair bit in 2021, even through the LCK playoffs as well. Now, we see certain aspects of this happen on the map as well, where they're able to find these five-man collapses on the strong side. If you're going to show on your weak side at the same time, you will find yourself in 3v5 scenarios, and they're not afraid to use the Rift Herald to push the agenda on a side lane. At the same time, we talked about the Medline's tactics and how it's very good at punishing teams who are trying to catch waves rather than defend waves. This particular setup from Damukia allows them to place an emphasis on defending the waves on the weak side while pushing the agenda on the strong side as well, which is kind of one of the unique aspects of the way that they play these two lane compositions, where it hits the big strokes, right? Like instead of going for the D410, they often play a 320 instead. That allows them to create unexpected picks, but most importantly, the emphasis on defending the waves there. Now, as compared to how the LPL teams play this two lane style, this style of the way that Damankia sets up on the map is not necessarily a groundbreaking application of the two lane style, but it ticks the major boxes off so that they're able to play and go toe to toe with the likes of Mad Lions, who would be able to really attack a three lane team very effectively. So after this series, we can kind of compare from the two various lenses, right? Just hearing the discourse in general. If you were to look at it from the more Eastern point of view, where dancers are usually more practice, the criticism here could be that Humanized Champion Pool wasn't big enough. It was too small for this tournament. He couldn't find success playing the Rise, couldn't find success playing the Twisted Fate. He could only really play Silas and LeBlanc as answers to what the opponents were playing, right? They banned out the LeBlanc and they seem to be able to pinch him quite effectively. And the Yasuo, which Karsi Harvard in game 3, he very openly said that he did not play this champion, so more practice would have him be Yasuo ready or be able to play Rise versus Showmaker Syndra. Whereas if you were to look at things from a more holistic kind of analysis, which is what tends to happen more in the West, the conversation would be around how the Mad Lions played from a position of weakness. It seemed that they done it on the outscaling game and gave Showmaker too much credit, like I broke down earlier. They could have opted into the more favorable matchups, but ultimately it seemed that they were a little bit scared to commit to where their relative strengths were, right? And this could be in part due to them struggling to execute a strategy in the group stage against opponents who might be better at dealing with that two lane pick style. So, who is right? And you can say that both approaches are legitimate of sorts, and often this comes down to comparison between the optimizers, which is often what people depict these Eastern teams as, versus the innovators, which is where the Western teams have often found a lot more success, being able to create next level gameplay, having a very strong emphasis on the quality and conceptualization of the game, and the ability to define the meta. Like if you think back to when G2 were the most successful, when they were picking all these weird out of meta picks to throw people for a loop. Now, if we were to contextualize this into worlds, so this dichotomy might not necessarily hold up, with the LCK being the ones to really innovate and bring out the Yumi within the meta itself. And once you put Mithi's conversation about how the scrim blocks are formed globally, does this necessarily hold up? And this is a conversation for part two when we examine C9 versus Gen G. So this is the gap and an exploration of what happened between the Mad Lions and Damwon Kia. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. Do you think the Mad Lions could have done better and made it further if they played against one of the other LCK teams instead? And more importantly, with Damwon Kia rounding out their gameplay, adding this two-lane style to it, this is how they beat T1 the first time when they met in the LCK finals. Will we see a repeat of that when they meet in the semifinals of the World Championship? And with that, the semifinals will be happening in a few days, so let's get hyped for Worlds.